So I just spoke with Chris, the founder of Thatch. This is a first-time founder who just raised a $38 million Series A led by Index. And the crazy part is when I went through the story, I mean, he started in 2021. And if you look at it from 2021, 2022, 2023, he had like almost no revenue. Like he was really just building a product, pivoting, and then he finally launched. And 2024 was such a crazy year. In fact, the reason that I got him on the show is because I saw his LinkedIn post and his revenue chart doesn't look like a hockey stick. It looks like a vertical line. Like this guy launched in 2024 with it's basically like a health benefits platform. I mean, it doesn't get less sexy than that on the surface, but it absolutely exploded. And it's all because he figured out how to make something that every single company in the US needs exceptionally simple.
That's product market fit.
Product market fit.
Product market fit.
I called it the product market fit question.
Product market fit.
Product market fit.
Product market fit.
Product market fit.
I mean, the name of the show is Product Market Fit.
Do you think the Product Market Fit show has product market fit? Because if you do, then there's something you just have to do. You have to take out your phone. You have to leave the show 5 stars. It lets us reach more founders and it lets us get better guests. Thank you. And welcome to the show.
It's so great to be here, Pablo. I'm a big fan of your show.
Dude, I had to have you on because I just saw like a post of yours and it was your revenue chart. And, you know, they talk about like, you want like hockey stick growth, but this wasn't hockey stick growth. It was just like vertical line, man. You know what I mean? Like it literally, it's kind of like nothing. And then it was just like up. And so I was like, okay, I don't know what the y-axis is there, but this guy just raised a $38 million Series A. From, you know, I guess Index and General Catalyst, which was also part of that kind of whole post. And I was like, all right, something's going on here. Gotta see what's going on. And, you know, you did it in health benefits, no less, which is not from the outside looking in something you'd expect that like is about to be reinvented. You know what I mean? Like, it's just not one of those people think you got to do something crazy. Maybe you are doing something crazy, but in this space, that's just not anybody would consider sexy. So, with all that said, you know, take us to the beginning. Like you mentioned, there was kind of a pivot, like you kind of ended up here by accident. So where did things like all start?
When people think about the journey to product market fit, a lot of folks start at writing the first line of code or when you get the idea in the shower or maybe when you get your first customer. But in my experience, it actually starts way before all of that. And the single most important determining factor to getting to product market fit is actually who you choose as your co-founder. And I'll tell you what I mean. You have kids. You look young, but you married. You have kids.
We're trying. We're in the process, but no kids yet.
Okay. Well, good luck with that. I just had my first a few months ago. It's
Congrats.
Beautiful boy. Yeah, I'm feel so lucky. He's amazing. And you know, having a baby like a lot of work though. I mean, you're staying up all night, not getting any sleep, and you really want, you know, to grow up and be a successful kind of, you know, member of society. You got to teach them how to sleep and walk and talk and all that. And who you raise your kid with is actually a really, you know, important factor. Like you wouldn't go on one date and say, hey, you want to have kids, you know, next week, and then there you're off to raising a child. And I'm super lucky to have this, you know, really amazing life partner, my wife, and I couldn't imagine, you know, raising the child without her. But when you think about it, most people get to know their partner over a very long period of time before they, you know, make the big leap to start a family. And what's amazing, you know, now being 3 months into having a baby and 3 years into a startup, doing a startup is a lot more work, or at least a lot more time invested than you know, raising a kid. And it's something that when you think about how many people are out there starting companies with somebody that they barely know, it kind of seems crazy to me because you're in for oftentimes just as long of a journey if you're building something really meaningful. And so that person that you start the company with is just truly the most important first decision you make. And I know a lot of people, I think back to my story of how I met my co-founder who, you know, he's truly just this amazing person who I'm extremely lucky to have started Thatch with. His name's Adam Stevenson. And we didn't meet in college. We weren't even working at the same company. Funnily enough, I was in biotech at the time, in software product development. And I was reading some of these new regulations that were passing in U.S. healthcare, rather esoteric. A lot of them focus on APIs in healthcare. And, my background, API stands for active pharmaceutical ingredient. And so it means something quite different in the technology sector. And I remember coming across his profile, Adam, on a YC forum, and he had started his career in healthcare, a big insurance company, security engineering. He had built and launched a few bootstrap things on the side, and one of those led him into Stripe, where he was an early engineer and ended up, rising through the ranks to see, a few hundred people or 100 people to several thousand people. So he had this just a really amazing perspective on APIs from his early experience healthcare. So I reached out to him like, can you help me make sense of like what I just read? And he was kind enough to respond to my cold outbound email. And when we met, we had this instant connection. We were actually both at a point in our careers where we were ready to lead and start something new. We were both kicking around a few ideas. We always knew we wanted to start a company one day. We bonded over the fact that, very early on, too early, we had both lost parents to cancer. We knew we wanted to build something in healthcare, and this idea of improving the healthcare experience for individuals was something that was always really kind of core to our DNA. But we didn't go the next week say, let's go leave our job and start a company. It was actually funny. I remember in our first meeting, we were on the call, and I was really enjoying the conversation. I thought we were having this super amazing call and really insightful. But I could kind of hear him on his mechanical keyboard, like typing the whole time. And I was like, oh man, you must be busy sending all these emails. And, he's obviously a busy guy. And then that evening, he sends me an email. It's like 20-page summary of like the things that we talked about and all these ideas that he had. And I remember it was probably like the best email I'd ever received. It turns out he like wasn't sending emails. He was typing these like rigorous pages of notes in our conversation. And so the next morning, I kind of, cracked my knuckles and fired away something that was like 50% longer. And at that point, it was kind of the beginning of this really long series of exchanges that we got to know each other over a period of several months. A lot of it through writing and exchanging long format ideas. I remember like a month in, he sent me this 100-page personality questionnaire and assess for compatibility. Like even my wife, I did have to do something like that.
How do you, let me ask you this, man, like, when, and trying to phrase it the right way, but like, he's the more proven one in this, right? Like he's at Stripe, like 6 years there, he's technical, he's got so many options. What do you think he saw in you? And I ask this because like your founder and, these days, like you're trying to find a technical co-founder, like it's really hard to find someone who's already kind of proven in the way that Adam was. Like, but what do you think he saw in you at the time that made him write those long things, that made him like dig in, right? And get excited about working together?
It's a great question. And the irony on my part is, I spent years toiling away in a research lab and have an advanced degree in science from MIT to be the non-technical co-founder. I think that one of his gifts actually is spotting talent. And I've seen that both at Thatch now over the years. I mean, the thing I'm most proud of at the company is the team that we have assembled. And he played the most important role in assembling most of the team. But he had also developed that reputation when he was at Stripe and had actually sourced a lot of the solutions engineering team himself and, was recognized as a talent magnet within Stripe. And so I think for these types of things, when you think about starting a company, a lot of it has to do with this idea of internal chemistry between the two people, but also complementary, where, in some ways, if you think about what you need to start a company and be successful, it's basically building stuff, recruiting people, and selling stuff. I think that perhaps he saw from my background going from a cancer researcher at MIT to then starting a sales team for a technology startup, that was a little bit of an unconventional and, high risk, high reward type of path. Maybe he could see me, sitting on the product market fit show and hopefully having a good conversation. But I'm definitely super grateful for the experience that we had while we were getting to know each other, which ultimately culminated in going out to this trip together in the mountains. And it was like the fall.
How long after you met each other was this?
It was maybe 6 months or so. And we spent a long weekend in Utah. We went hiking and it was beautiful. The leaves are starting to change color and everything's kind of all magnificent.
This is like your classic bromance story, man. Like,
It was
this
a
is
real, it was,
this is incredible.
and we came back and I remember, we were getting ready to go to dinner and he sat down and was like, so you want to do this? And I say, hell yeah. And I quit my job on Monday. And
No way.
yeah. And it
No
was,
idea yet. You guys had ideas or no?
We did. We had ideas. They just didn't happen to be the one that we're doing now. And so I remember actually, as soon as we left our jobs, we were kind of on the path.
He quit too that Monday, Stripe?
Yeah, I think it was maybe a few days after due to some notice and stuff like that. But we were basically starting at the exact same time. And so we both went
I just got to ask one tangent. Like, how do you, and maybe this didn't even come up. Maybe it's a better question for Adam, but because like you were part of this kind of recruiting thing, maybe it is actually the right question for you. Like, how do you justify to him almost the opportunity cost of going into startup? Maybe you didn't think this way at all, but like one of the things I see is like, and I've heard this before, it's like, especially like at Stripe, like you're already making whatever he was making, 6 years in, running, thousands of people. But then there's the stock, there's the potential, like, Stripe is on a tear, like it's not going anywhere, like you have so much stock upside. You do the math on like an annual basis, like that's millions of dollars probably per year. And then you do the math on like, what does this have to become? Like Thatch have to become this idea we haven't even really come up with, have to be exit for me to even just be in the same place. And sometimes like people look at that, they're like, that's just dumb. Like I'm just not going to do that. Did he think that way at all? Did he do that kind of math?
It's a good question. I don't think that if you want to start a company, you should be optimizing for financial outcome, actually. Because if you run all the numbers and you break it down, you're much more likely to be just on a, excluding your own personal desire, you're much more likely to be better off staying in a big technology company. And this kind of comes down to why then do people start companies, or what was kind of his motivation and my motivation. A big part of it, of course, is you want to build this venture backable technology company and go, expand your career and your skill set. But a lot of it comes down to actually what you want to do with your life and what's the impact that you want to make on the world. And I was just thinking about today, in the US, we had the new presidential inauguration yesterday, and it's, remarkable, the institution that has been built over these few hundred years in the US. But people forget that the system as it is today endures and is largely what it is, thanks to many of the wisdom of many of the America's first founder. And arguably the most successful founder of all time is George Washington. I really like the question that you asked, because when you think about Washington, most people think about he's the first president of the United States, or he was this kind of decorated commander who fought in the Revolutionary War. But what a lot of people don't know about him is in the very beginning of his career, he was a commander, but he was fighting for the British. And he was fighting for freedom in the American colonies. That's what he believed in. And much later, he pivoted to fighting, for actually American independence. But there was a stretch of time in between, like 15 years, that nobody knows about, or at least is not well known, where he was actually one of America's first venture capitalists. And so after his stint fighting for the English to protect American people, and before he started the Revolutionary War, back then people weren't investing in seed stage startups. The big speculative asset was land. And so he was an early speculator. Over 15 years, he pioneered a lot of the concepts in VC, like general partnership, limited partners, carried interest. He accumulated over that time assets that today would be equivalent to like $38 billion in adjusted GDP terms. And you can ask kind of him, well, you have all this money. Why would you go give all that up to go fight in the Revolutionary War? And it turns out that he had this mission or this belief that the American population should be free, that the principles of economics should be grounded in free markets and liberty. And if he had stayed on the VC path or the entrepreneurial path, you could say, he wouldn't have actually been able to realize the great institution that became the United States. And so when I think about for Adam or for anyone who's trying to start a company, it can't just be about financial outcome. It also has to be about a mission or what you believe in. And if you can actually marry those two things, I think that he was actually a great president not because he was a great warlord. And in fact, maybe he would have tried to become a king and we would have had a dictator if that was the case. But I think the experience, of rationing economic forces and kind of being an early venture capitalist actually informed a lot of his ability to govern a country and set foundational principles.
I think that's totally legit, and I like you pointing that out because the utilitarian kind of philosophy is it's all about maximizing happiness and minimizing pain, and that's the sort of thinking that'll get you down the road of like, why would I ever go down this higher risk, lower financial or probably outcome when I have this thing. But it turns out, at least my kind of philosophy I've adopted, right, like from the Viktor Frankl camp, is like we're all really in search of meaning, and that's why people do what George Washington did. That's why people go fight wars that they know are going to be, frankly, only painful, and that's why people, I think, start startups for the most part, like even whatever they're driven, like in some cases they are driven by money, but there is this kind of quest that for meaning underneath it all, like quest for impact, quest for building something that you think needs to exist, like from really going from 0 to 1. And so it makes sense that, the people that do it, frankly, typically, I mean, sometimes it's because they have no alternative, but like in many cases, at least certainly in your and Adam's case, I think like that's why.
Yeah, very well said. And I think that you kind of have to believe in some kind of mission to endure all of the BS and pain that you're about to go through. And it's funny because we came out of the gate like super strong. I mean, we closed this amazing seed round from amazing investors, and we were so proud. We were kind of on top of the world. And
how much did you raise?
It was around 5 or 6 million or so, and it was kind of the boom times of early 2021.
This is 2021. Okay, and it was all like kind of this team market fit, like two rock stars going after some big market. Like what was even the thing then?
Yeah, great question. So I kind of alluded, we had both lost parents to cancer, and we were originally looking at like a clinical direction and talking to cancer patients. And we had a few theories, but no customers, kind of an early prototype. We raised the money kind of on this idea of, expedition and kind of this general theme. But, very shortly afterwards, we conducted a bunch of user interviews and found that there wasn't really that much demand for the thing that we were building, which was kind of more patient trial matching. And technically, the data access to do so, plugging into existing healthcare APIs, wasn't entirely there. And so here we were, like a couple of weeks after raising this big round and realizing, oh man, it's not going to work.
And the timeline, just so I understand, the timeline is you quit on like a Monday. Adam quit a few weeks later, and you raised the seed round kind of right away.
We raised a little bit of friends and family money first. So it's like a handful of angel investors. And then it was literally 3 months later that we closed our seed round. So we were very, very early. I don't know if I would like recommend that in retrospect, but on the other hand, actually, I think, the window was open and it worked out quite well for us. So it's hard to look back and rewrite history and ask what could have been different. But I do know it was very hard when we kind of, all of our best laid plans were basically coming to nothing. It's a time like this where I think that, you're having conversations with investors. You're like, well, it's not going to work. But it's a time like this where having this idea of a mission is really important because we knew we wanted to make an impact on the healthcare system for people. And so we didn't go say, okay, now we're going to go pivot to building a dev tool, or we're going to go pivot to doing this. Like we really listened in the interviews to what the pain points of the individuals we talked to had articulated. And one big one, which may not resonate in Canada, but certainly in the US, is that paying for healthcare sucks. And so we ended up looking down a path involving the healthcare payment rails. So there's a health savings account and flexible spending account, really these consumer-directed accounts designed to make it easier to afford and pay for healthcare.
What did you hear? I'm curious, like specifically in those customer interviews.
Yeah, I mean, in some cases, it was the insurance that my company offered didn't cover this really expensive cancer treatment, or I'm getting these confusing bills from the health system, and it's hard for me to keep track of what's in network and out of network. And they all kind of were really centered on this idea that the financial experience in healthcare was quite suboptimal. And when you think about the US, I mean, almost 20% of GDP is healthcare. If it was its own country, it would be bigger than basically every other country but China. And we're having all of this money flowing through it, and yet it's the most opaque and complex industry. And so when we kind of had this light bulb moment of my co-founder has this amazing fintech background. I have a ton of experience in healthcare. Actually looking at that intersection where magic can happen makes a lot of sense. And so that's what we did. We started going down this path of tooling out an HSA. And
Is this 22 now? Like early 22?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's all kind of going
It's a
together.
blur, man. I know the 3 years is.
And our big goal is kind of like launching it by the end of the year, end of 2022. I believe in kind of maximizing the surface area of luck. And that means trying to talk to as many people as possible. And so as we were building it, I was taking every single call that I could get. Like everybody who was willing to talk to me, it doesn't matter who they were or what they were doing. Like in the early days, it's very, very important that you tune your antenna to as many ideas or as many perspectives as possible.
And you mean, but specifically people in this kind of health, finance world?
And mostly potential customers. And maybe I should clarify that, like, people in the health finance world, yes, but really talking to potential users. And so anybody who would be willing to use your thing or even adjacent to using your thing. And it was funny, we had this one conversation with an individual and kind of coming out of these conversations in general. One of them mentioned this new law that had passed called the Individual Coverage Health Reimbursement Arrangement, or ICRA, which is, by the way, these US healthcare acronyms that keep getting worse, like HSA, FSA, ICRA. It's like, but he said, can you use the technology you're building for this? And I said, I don't know. So we went and did a little bit of research. And when I learned about it, it made so much sense. It was this idea that rather than the company having to choose the health insurance and health benefits for their team, instead they could give them this bucket of tax-free money and everybody could opt into the experience that makes sense for them, whether that's insurance or co-pays, they can pay for therapy, whatever it might be. And it reminded me of some of the initial conversations we had heard around the pain being related to networks, what insurance you opt into because your employer chooses for you, related to being able to pay for things out of pocket.
And is this just to be clear, like, is this just a health spending account or is it a bit more than that because you can use that to sign up to a plan that then is more than a health spending account?
Exactly. So it's almost like we call it like a turbocharged HSA. So you can use it on out-of-pocket expenses, but you can also use it to buy these individual health insurance policies. And maybe this will make sense when I give you an example, which is like we literally had this problem ourselves. So when we were getting set up as a small company, a small startup, getting health insurance set up for our team, when you're getting started, by the way, it's like you download you get your payroll. It takes 5 seconds. You get your Zoom for video conferencing, get Slack for communications, and then you get healthcare. It's like it's funny when you look at all those lists that people have of like startup tools to get started. Like no one actually lists healthcare because it's such a pain in the ass. So you have to talk to a insurance broker. They run you through these really complex options.
So that's the one part that's still like the old school way.
Super old school. Yeah. Well, and the funny thing too is like if you add up all other SaaS spend that a startup may pay for, it's still maybe like 20% or even maybe 10% of the cost of your health insurance. It's still expensive. It's like insanely expensive. This is like a US thing, but it's insanely expensive. And, it's something as well that if you're a small company, you're maybe not fully equipped to even make a decision on behalf of a distributed team. And so I chose a plan that was based out of Texas. I live in Austin, but our first employee he lived in San Francisco. And the first thing he said was, why don't we have Kaiser? It's this health system I love. And it reminds me of the French model back home. He was from France. And, gosh, our insurance really sucks because we don't offer Kaiser. And then we hired someone in New York and, I can't see my doctor anymore. What's the problem? Like, why do we have such a terrible plan? And I'm talking to my co-founder, Adam, like we're spending all this money on something everyone's complaining about. And by the way, something like 10% in the US, 10% of VC dollars go directly to health insurance companies. So it's a really big expense. Like it's percentage of total comp, it's gigantic. So we're having this experience and it's like a total pain. And so I'm instantly getting, okay, yeah, if everyone can choose their own plan, I can provide the money. That actually makes a lot more sense. And then the actual administration of health insurance is also a real pain too. Like I remember my mom, and this is, it was late 2022. My mom had just retired and we were taking this trip kind of to celebrate and we were in Japan. And it was the first time we had all gone. We'd all wanted to go for many years. And we're in Tokyo and I start getting these Slack pings. Someone's at the doctor and they say, hey, they're not taking my insurance. And then someone's at the pharmacy and they say, hey, my prescription's not covered anymore. And I'm like, oh no. And I was like, just go again tomorrow. It'll be fine. And then it turns out that in the process of trying to switch our first plan to a new plan, made everyone happy, which turns out is not possible. The administrator had dropped the ball and had canceled our coverage. And so everyone was going to be without insurance for 2 months. And so in healthcare, in American healthcare, like very bad. And so I'm on the phone. I have to set my alarm for like 3 a.m. Tokyo time to have this conversation with the insurance company when they were open about like, please, begging you, please, like, don't.
Just complete chaos. And it's like not that, like, you think of building a startup and you're gonna have to fight battles, but like this is not the battle you want to be fighting around, like helping people pay for the doctors. Like that's supposed to be the status quo stuff that just kind of happens, just kind of works, and then you build on top of that.
100%. Yeah, it's supposed to just work, and it was occupying all this time. And so the learning for me there was kind of the classic YC wisdom of solve the problem that you have yourself. And it was kind of staring me in the face for quite a while. And that's why, but sometimes you just have to actually experience it. And that's then going to influence the way you design it. And, when you're pivoting, it's really tricky because you have employees.
How many people did you have at this point, like late 22?
It was still single digits, but it was not just two. And so you have employees and they sign up to this one thing. And, in some sense, folks sign on for the mission and to and know that there's going to be some changes along the way to get to where you need to go. But everyone's just been spending 6 months building this other thing, and so now it's like, oh geez, we're gonna do something different. Like, and so you want to be really careful about kind of knowing when the right time is to commit. And huge credit to my co-founder. Our approach here was we were actually getting ready to do a piece in TechCrunch and announce things to the world. And I'm really glad that we waited because that's
announced the old, like the existing product, not the new product.
Well, so yes, but we were getting ready to announce kind of like the launch. And I'm glad we waited because like the genie doesn't go back in the bottle. And what we did, we said, hey, we've got this HSA. And we were rather vague about it, but like, empowering startups to offer health benefits. And we included some language around it that gave us a little bit of optionality, even though the product, like, we hadn't built anything. And we figured like, if there really was demand for this thing, that we would get some inbound demo requests and stuff like that. And so the weekend, this is kind of crazy when I think about it, but the weekend before, my co-founder, and this is why, choosing the right co-founder is so important. He's a super scrappy, he's got great front end design sense. And so he prototyped what the new product would look like. Of course, none of the buttons worked, but it was kind of this, you could see the experience end to end. And so we ran the piece and got a bunch of demo requests and walked a bunch of people through kind of the first 10 minutes, like, here's the product of today.
Like how many, like how were you talking about 10, 20, 30? Like how many requests you get?
It was at least 100.
Wow.
And so my calendar was like stacked. Like I had an 8, like 9.
That's demand. Like that right there. Like you put a piece, I mean, TechCrunch's putting out stuff every day. Yeah, sure. A lot of people read it, but like a lot of stuff you just skim through it. So 100 actual actions of a request is a big deal.
It was crazy, especially with how vaguely it all was written, which with retrospect is, I'm so glad we did that. And so we shared what we had today, and then we're like, and then also we're getting ready to launch this new thing. I ran through the demo of the prototype, and without fail, probably 7 or of the 8 people in the first day, maybe one of them was interested in the HSA. 7 were interested actually in the other thing. They're like, I don't care about that, but like, you give me that other thing, I really want it. And maybe like one person wasn't interested. And so I remember at the end of the day, I ended up, I picked up the phone, I called out, I'm like, dude, we're gonna be able to sell the crap out of this thing. Like, this is.
And what were you like? Tell me a bit more. Like, what when you talked about the new thing, what were you saying at that point? Like, what was your kind of your pitch? Let's say
it was easy to articulate it because we had the problem ourselves, which is it's hard to find the solution that makes everybody on your team happy. It's really expensive and painful, and you don't have the time to deal with it. So let us handle it. You set a budget, give people the money. They can opt into what makes the most sense for them, and people will be happier, and you'll save time and money.
That's like the turbocharged HSA, right? Would you come to call that? Okay.
Yeah, exactly. The learning out of here is you can almost always get 80% of the signal from 20% of the work. Like if you think about the 80-20 principle, we put in 20% of the work building a full product and got 80% of the signal. And if you think about it, you can get 100% in the same amount of time. If you can get 100% of the signal on one product, you can get actually 80% of the signal on 5 by doing 20% of the work. And so a lot of times it's about getting as many shots on goal, or at least getting enough things in front of enough people that you can start to really make a determination. And when that happened, that's when we committed and we said to the team, like, hey, this is going to be hard, but we're going to do it, and we're going to do it in time for open enrollment. So in the US, there's this time period called open enrollment where everybody is allowed to get health insurance. It starts from November, ends in December. And if you miss that window, it's very seasonal business. So if you miss that window, you have a whole year of learning that you're going to miss out on. And we couldn't afford to miss out on that year of learning. Like, it was, you have money, but you don't have that much money, and you got a team, and you got to move quickly. And one reflection was that by actually defining like where we want to be at by a certain period of time, that external deadline was imposed upon us, it's actually an amazing forcing function for, in a high trust environment, to say, I trust you that like all of the planes are going to land on time. And I trust that you're going to make the right decision to deprioritize the things that we don't need in order to make sure that we can launch as fast as we can. And I think one of the things that can hurt startups when they're getting off the ground is they don't really have any externally imposed deadlines. It's all internal. And we want to get this done by so-and-so date. It's like, well, but the scope expanded. Okay, we'll push it a little bit longer. So in our case, I feel very fortunate that we had this forcing function in our business, because if we didn't, I could have seen it slipping, or we made decisions to delay it. And if we weren't ready at that time, I mean, we're for like 0 customers, begging our first users. So having like 100 companies and 500,000 run rate in like a month from 0.
This was, by the way, end of 23 that you were targeting for launch, like November 23.
So that's right. Yeah. So it's 23.
Okay. And so you're building like all of 22, you kind of have this TechCrunch thing, you get all these insights. And then 23 is just like build mode, like hone in, forcing function.
Yeah. And 22, we built the HSA and we actually launched it. In 23, it was a total flop. Like, nobody wanted it. And
what's that sounds so similar. Turbocharge has HSA and just HSA, but HSA doesn't let you pick a plan. Is that the core difference? Okay. And that was so big, because just having money you can spend wherever is one thing. Having a plan and actual policy in place is a completely different thing from the perspective of a user, and I guess the company servicing those employees, those users.
Exactly. Because healthcare is a local business in the US. And so that means that the local network of hospitals that have engaged with the local insurers determines the quality of the experience you're going to get. So if you have the choice to say, I'm seeing Dr. Smith and Dr. Smith takes Aetna, therefore I'm going to get the Aetna plan, that's much better than if your company opts into, I'm going to take Blue Cross. Well, it doesn't cover Dr. Smith, so it's not helpful for me. So that part's useful. And then the big bucket of money around it, you can allocate, like half of people in a given year aren't even going to go to the doctor. And so the company's spending all this money on something that no one's going to actually use. Well, in this paradigm, you can actually opt into a very inexpensive plan that's likely to cover you, or that will definitely cover you in the event of anything really bad happening, but you're not likely to use. And so now what do I do with all this extra money? So, that's where it gets really interesting. We see people buying GLP-1s, directly from Lilly Cash Pay. We see people being able to pay for that high dollar therapist that doesn't take insurance. We see people, kind of on and on. And like, that's can be really life-changing to people, even outside of the insurance. But because the bucket of money is a lot bigger, you actually can't get that under an HSA, which might be $50 a month or $100 a month. It's not the same. So that was like, and everybody at Thatch wanted to use it ourselves. And that was a great thing. It's like, I wanted this as an employer. I wanted this as an employee. And when we launched, it's great too, because like then we were all customers of our own product, and that made it really easy to iterate. And, like getting everything done on time, like it's not going to come out of the gate perfect, right? Like we felt like things were clicking because we were actually getting a lot of companies in, but then we found like every sharp edge of the product, and we had to patch all these things up. And I remember having conversations with like CEOs of companies we just onboarded, saying, I'm so sorry, the thing broke or whatever. And it was really tough because we had to fix a lot of things. But I think one thing I learned is, if your customers care enough to complain and get you on a call and rake you over the coals, it means you're onto something, right? Because if they didn't care, then they would just leave, And we were grateful, a year later, we actually kept the vast majority of the customers we onboarded, and we saw very strong retention, and that kind of told us that we were onto something really big. But even then, when we were kind of right at that point, it still felt somewhat precarious because then we had the question of like, how are we going to scale this sufficiently and get distribution and, all these other things. And so I think that that was one of the first moments where it felt like it was clicking, but it's still, I wasn't sure we had captured that elusive product market fit.
You love this show. You don't want to miss the next episode. Why would you? So hit that follow button. Trust me, it's in your own best interest. What was the innovation like? Were you just the first to spot and act on a regulatory change? Or was there technical or other innovation happening, something else that you saw or were able to do that others just, hadn't seen or just hadn't tried to build around?
I mean, this comes back to kind of the importance of the co-founder and the complementary skill sets and bringing different domains together. But back when we were trying to do it ourselves, there was no easy way to administer an ICRA. You had to send people to insurance companies' websites and navigate these kind of hellholes of government exchanges. And then they had to put these big insurance premiums, like $1,000 a month, in some cases $2,400 a month per family, on their personal credit cards. They had to file for reimbursement from the employer and punch it into payroll. And we had this insight with a team coming from Stripe, Shopify, Ramp, Robinhood, that these are fintech problems. And if you build really great financial infrastructure, you can actually create a super compelling product experience. And we combined that financial acumen, that financial technology acumen, with having literally experienced this problem firsthand. And I think that it was that, putting it together, that allowed us to build the products in the way that we wanted to use. And in that way, we had a slightly different model. A lot of folks in the industry had and we weren't the first person to do this, but a lot of folks in the industry had a more operationally heavy build. And we recognized that we wanted to make this self-serve, we wanted to make it intuitive, we wanted to make it easy for a small business startup founder to use. And that insight of having the pain and then also coming to it with the right technology actually allowed us to innovate more quickly and smooth some of these rough edges over faster and create an experience that actually felt better and more compelling than traditional insurance. Because if you send people to healthcare.gov and you do all this, it kind of takes the magic out of it because it's kind of painful. Like, people want it to just work. And so we worked pretty hard, building it a whole for like a year to like nail that experience. And I'm so glad we did. I think the bar for an MVP in healthcare is also a little bit higher because this is people's like large sums of money. This is people's health that we're talking about. Like the cost of messing up is someone can't see their doctor or have an appointment or get the surgery. It's a big deal. And so it's really important that coming out of the gate, we felt that we wanted to build something that really, really worked. And we put a lot of energy into that, and it still wasn't perfect. So you're never going to be perfect in your first launch. But I think if you're building in healthcare, you do have to have a slightly higher bar for what is your MVP.
It's crazy. If you think about the Thatch story so far, like 21, 22, 23, like you're 2.5 or so years in, you raised a few million, and all you've really done so far is launch a product. And somehow from here, a year later, you raise a $40 million round. Like, what happened in 2024? It must have been like just a crazy year.
Well, after we kind of stuck the pig through the python in end of 2023, 2024 was, in retrospect, I mean, it was an amazing year. We grew like 8x plus, and we onboarded, so many companies and numbers, and it was, but along the way, it actually like felt a lot more precarious than it was. When we onboarded our first large customer, we still didn't believe that we actually could do that repeatedly. We still had to really innovate on distribution and ask, where is health insurance distributed today?
Walk me through what was the business model? How do you charge? Just per employee per month, or is it something else?
Yeah, we charge per employee per month, and then there's a component around actually getting commissions from the insurance companies when you do enrollments for them, and so it adds up to kind of a nice average revenue per user, kind of the mid hundreds
Per employer or employee?
Per employee, yeah.
Per employee per month of like high margin revenue per year. Okay. Of high margin revenue to you, like SaaS-like margin revenue to you?
Yeah. So and this kind of comes back to building the infrastructure in the right way. But the margin profile is quite strong if you build it in a way that's kind of self-service and scalable. Now, there's nuance in local markets where in some cases it's more operationally intensive to support certain carriers and so forth. But on the whole, it's a real like technology company. And that was obviously what we set out to do. And, I don't think we would have raised such an amazing round if there were, doubts about whether this was kind of an operational business. But I think a big insight was that today a lot of health insurance is distributed through payroll companies. It's distributed through health insurance brokers. And we can try to go direct to employers all we want. We do have a motion where we take companies to come in down to us, but we recognize that working directly with these distributors would give us an opportunity to get our product into more hands more quickly. And so just as 2023 was about product, innovation or iteration or pivoting, 2024 was about go-to-market iteration and pivoting. And we're doing things a year ago. So like it did not work at all. Like we ran TikTok and Facebook ads and we did all sorts of stuff. But one of the big moments where things clicked was actually we were able to close a really big partnership with QuickBooks and Allstate to distribute Thatch into their payroll system. And to do that, we actually had to spin up a SWAT team, really incredible folks who had to expose a lot of our infrastructure as an API, which I'm very glad we have all those Stripe engineers as a result. But we ended up going live, and it was a smashing success. Ended up driving over 100 companies in a couple months, and it's still scaling kind of in the off season. But it wasn't really just one thing that clicked. It was a lot of small things like getting slightly better in terms of our product readiness and go-to-market readiness upmarket, getting a little bit better at playing nice with partners and actually seeing brokers and payroll partners as, we want to distribute through you, we want to be a partner to you, we don't want to be antagonistic to you. And so how can we reshape some of our product surface area and our go-to-market around you? So those were a lot of the things that we had to get right. And then it all kind of, because it's a seasonal business, you don't fully know if all of the things that you did are going to pay off until this short period of time where everybody enrolls. And that was really when we started to feel, hey, things are starting to really work and we've got something really magical. And we were really grateful to...
Because that's why the line is so, because the 8X happens not really through the year, but mainly in those last 2 months.
Yeah, exactly.
Crazy.
So we do onboard people throughout the year, but
there's kind of like, and then just the inflection point. And walk me through this. You mentioned there's a couple of things. One of them is the forcing functions, which I think are so important and either like underutilized or maybe not used the right way. Like, are you intentional about that? Like, do you find ways to create forcing functions, especially given that you just have those 2 months, like, but through the years so that your team is fully like aligned and has something, you see the big guys, like you see Steve Jobs or Elon Musk or whatever, like, they're doing this like on purpose. You see it happening all the time. Like, are you doing things like that as well internally?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I remember joking. I wish that open enrollment was every quarter, and because we would get a lot more done. But no, so as the company gets a little bit bigger and more mature, you have to kind of start to develop frameworks around, quarters and OKRs. And so that was a big thing in 2024 where we started setting out quarterly goals and kind of operated around these quarters, and started to move the whole operating rhythm of the company around these, with the big one obviously leading up to November. The other thing that helps actually comes down to the idea of the mission and what you stand for. In our case, our mission is to build a healthcare system people love. And it actually becomes very easy while you're kind of making these micro decisions along the way to get there to ask the question, is this getting us closer to a healthcare system that people love? Or is this just something that makes sense or is cool as a business? Example, a lot of people ask us, or a lot of people have said, why don't you go offer payroll? Because if you have the payroll yourself, then it would be a lot easier. You could be the one-stop shop. I said, I can see how that would be beneficial to our margins and our NRR. I'm not clear on how that gets us faster to building an amazing healthcare system that is founded in the principles of free markets and individual choice. And so, although it makes sense for us as a business, it actually doesn't get us closer to that place that we're trying to go. And when you imbue that into the culture, then everyone doesn't need to wonder or ask, like, should I do this or that, or does it make sense? You can actually move a lot more quickly. And that kind of comes back to the idea from the beginning where, having that mission or having something you stand for is really important, not just for you as a founder building something, but also for your team, knowing why are we here? Like, what are we trying to build? I mean, why did we leave our big technology, cushy jobs to go join a startup? It's not just for a financial return. Obviously, if we're successful, we'll get that. But it's also because we care about what we're doing, and we want to, and everybody on the team like wants to build something in healthcare. They've had an experience with themselves or someone they love. There's so much to target rich environment for opportunity and, to improve the kind of chaotic landscape of healthcare today. So what I found is having that mission, in addition to kind of the formal structure and the operating rhythm, really helps speed things up and accelerate, particularly as you grow.
Well, missions, like it sometimes seems like a little bit cheesy, right? But like the reality is a good mission energizes, it aligns, it focuses, and tie that with a good culture. Like meaningful culture is culture that helps people make micro decisions without policies. Like they understand general principles. As a result of that, they know how to make decisions that come up in the day to day without having to be like, hey, should I go this way or that way on every single thing, because they understand the kind of bigger picture. Let me ask one question before we go to our final two questions that we always end with, which is just like in terms of scale, in terms of numbers, like how many customers, how many employees are using Thatch today?
Yeah, we've got, around about 1,000 or so, companies, give or take. And in terms of the scale, as there's employees at those companies, we're in the tens of thousands. And so it's been really remarkable. Yeah, it's funny. Like I remember going back at our internal projection, a year ago. And
Yeah, sure you didn't have that. You actually beat. You're one of the few that beat. Well, because you went like literally from effectively 0 to 10,000 in what, like a year, maybe 14 months, right? Something like that.
it was basically a year, which is pretty.
That's incredible.
And it comes back to the most important choices you make in the startup or the people that you share it with. And so I want, I'm glad to be on the show and give insights, but it's much more about the co-founder you choose and the team that you gather than it is about kind of a single brilliant stroke of insight or anything. And so I think it's really amazing that we've put together such an incredible team who, and again, I think when we're looking to next year, hey, what does a year from now look? It looks, just as scary and crazy. Like after every summit, there's another summit, and how are we going to get there? But that's where having the right people around you that you trust and that can execute and allows you to say, kind of with some level of comfort, that even though we can't connect all the dots from here to there, we believe that we can connect one dot at a time, and we can see that dot that's right in front of us. And so let's get after it together.
We'll end there. We'll take that even as your kind of final piece of advice, because I think that's been a huge focus area, which is the people, the team, and like that is the one thing that you have. Like the market will change, the competition will change, the product will change, the team, the core team especially, hopefully stays intact. Certainly can stay intact for many, many years. So then let me ask the other final question, which is like, when did you feel like you had true product market fit?
We had lunch one day with Ben Horowitz, and we asked him what his definition of product market fit was. And he said there's not, particularly in B2B, there's not one moment of product market fit. Product market fit in B2B looks kind of like a sawtooth curve, where you've got it with one subsection, and then you kind of have to go to another subsection, and so you're always kind of iterating and getting there. And that certainly was true in our case, where, when we onboarded a bunch of small companies, we said, oh, we have product market fit here. And then we onboarded some bigger companies. We said we had a product market fit here. And then we started getting distribution through new ways. So kind of got product market fit here. But looking back, there was never one moment where I felt like, oh, I've made it, and so it's all secure, it's safe. And I still wake up, every few hours in the middle of the night and wonder, what is the next
Heart pounding out of your chest. Like that's just the classic, the founder wake up.
And, I think that, just to your point about advice to founders, and, one thing that we didn't fully cover was just how much you're going to get advice from experts that may not actually be right, and how important it is to trust your own intuition. And I think about VCs. I mean, it's really tough when you raise your first round of funding, and you're a first time founder, and you see VCs and they've worked with the best companies, and they've studied all the history, and they have all the context. But one thing I've realized is VCs are kind of like art critics, where they know what greatness looks like. They can distinguish between okay art and great art. But in many cases, it's been some time since they've picked up a paintbrush, or in some cases they never have. And when you think back to, great painters who are learning how to develop their style, if they had just followed along with what art critics told them to do, they can learn a lot, but they'll never find their own style. And when I think about being a founder, a lot of it is about trusting your intuition, figuring out the way that you paint, which may be very different from the way that others paint. And when I think about really, trusting your own intuition, it's really tough because, I remember there were so many times when really smart people told us that our idea didn't make sense or it wasn't going to work. And when I think back to, Churchill, which we're gonna bring it back a little bit, but when he was at the end of his career, and everybody knows him today as this great prime minister who guided the UK through World War II, but in the years leading up to it, he actually was really, looking like he was at the very end of his political career. He was known as a great speaker, but he hadn't really accomplished much of anything. And his father was much more famous than he was at the time. And so he was living in his father's shadow. And as he was at the tail end approaching retirement, this was kind of the time when, Hitler was on the rise in Germany. And a few years before war broke out, he was sounding the alarm bell every day. And he was saying, he's actually going to be a tyrant and it's not safe. And this was a very unpopular view at the time because UK wasn't interested in, getting into another war. They had a philosophy of appeasement. But by the time everybody realized that he was right, he was the only person who had invested the time and energy into figuring out a solution. And so he was the actually only person who was fit to lead them through that crisis. And when I think about starting a company, believing in something that nobody else does helps you to achieve something that nobody else can. And if you are experiencing people telling you that you're not going to be successful and that your idea doesn't make sense, you might just be on the right path and you should just keep going.
I love that. I want to end it there, but I have to pull on just one thread really quick. You mentioned a lot of people said your idea wouldn't work. Tell me more, I'm not talking about names, but just tell me more about that, like which type of people, who, what idea, and like when, sort of thing.
A lot of it were kind of the initial folks who had, were leading, go to market at major brokerages or major insurance companies. And they said, oh, it'll never be ready for prime time. And, oh, don't you know the economics of it don't make sense? Or, the only customers that actually use it are these kind of rural cash strap, small businesses in the, rural areas. And they were right. Actually, a lot of the things that they said were true. But what they hadn't considered was that those were problems that could be solved through technology, ingenuity, and the natural shift over the past few years of the individual market plans getting better, less expensive, and more in parity with traditional health plans. And nobody at the time, a couple of years ago, necessarily could have predicted that shift. We had this intuition, this feeling that actually it does make sense. It is getting better every year. If you play this forward 10 years, it's going to look much different in 10 years than it does now. And when we talk to customers, I remember I was taking my dog to this dog trainer. He lived in rural Texas. I had to drive like 2 hours out. He was in the middle of this, field in the middle of nowhere. And I'm walking back, so pick up our dog, and we're walking around the grounds. And he's this, big Texan guy with suspenders and the cowboy hat and everything. He's got a big barn that says Texas A&M on it, and is his alma mater. And I was telling him, thank you so much. Our dog is so amazing. Thanks for watching. We're actually on a trip. And he asked me, so what do you do? I was like, oh, I'm in tech. He's like, oh, what kind of tech? Well, we help small companies like you get health benefits. And I explained to him how it works. He's like, oh, you mean the individual markets? Like, oh, I have this problem myself. I have these employees that we can't pay, and it's really hard to do it. I have to do it through the salary. And he just started talking for 20 minutes about like how great this idea was and how he really wanted to use it himself. And I remember like, none of these experts are talking to like this person, right? Who is like on the ground, who like is having the problem and actually experiences it. And when I think about having that resilience, part of it, it can't just be the resilience of insanity. Like you have to have some validation that you're on the right path, but the validation is much more important when it comes from customers than when it comes from experts. And that's why listening to your customers is the most important thing.
I fully agree. And I'm a firm believer that if the people have problems, the problems will get solved because things move forward. we don't know when, but it's not a matter of if, it's just a matter of time. And I think a lot of times the incumbents are so stuck in seeing things just be that way that they start to assume it'll always be that way. But like that's the beauty of capitalism, is like it'll find the problems, and over time, and at some point when the tech aligns, it'll figure out a way to solve them. Anyways, Chris, thanks so much for jumping on the show, man. This has been great.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Thanks for having me.
So picture this. It's months from now, years from now, and one of your founder friends, a really close founder friends of yours, guess what? Their startup went bankrupt. And it turns out if you had just shared the product market fit show with them, they would have learned everything they needed to find product market fit and to create a huge success. But instead, their startup has completely failed. You have blood on your hands. Don't let that happen. You don't want to live like that. It is terrible. So do what you need to do. Tell them about the show. Send it to them. Put it on WhatsApp. Put it on Slack. Put it where you need to put it. Just make sure they know about it and they check it out.